We're doing another comment question today. Claire Obscure asks why side-scrolling games always seem to go from left to right. This one ended up being a lot more complicated than I expected. At this point, I've just accepted that I have no ability to predict which question is going to have simple answers and which ones won't. First up, let's deal with a few assumptions. Do characters in two-dimensional games tend to travel to the right? Well, yeah, of course they do, right? I don't think anyone would argue that this is not the case. Almost all platformers, especially early ones, move in the same direction, and that trend has largely continued right up to the present day. The same goes for scrolling shooters. If you're not going up, you're going right. Now, there are some outliers. Kung Fu Master alternates the direction of travel on each floor. Some games like Kid Icarus are more concerned with moving up instead of right. Eventually, games got more complex, and it became more common for levels to require the player to go up, down, and yes, even to the left, as they navigate to their objective. But even as levels got more complicated, there was also still a tendency to stick the goal to the right of the player's starting point. Metroid is an interesting example. It's famously a non-linear game that requires travel in all directions. Right at the beginning, the first upgrade is only one screen to the left of the starting position. If the player chooses to go right, they'll only be able to move a few screens before being forced to backtrack. Right away, the game tries to communicate the message that the player can't treat it like most side-scrolling games. The original Prince of Persia starts the same way. The end of the first level is only a few screens to the right, but an unarmed player has no chance of getting past the sword-wielding guard. Instead, the player must go left until they find a sword of their own, then backtrack to their starting position. Some games require movement in both directions more or less equally, such as Chopper Lifter, which requires the player to go left to pick up hostages, and then move right to return them to safety. But what about games that make you go left, the way Super Mario Bros. Makes you go right? Games that really only allow travel to the left and no other directions. Can you think of any? Seriously, take a few seconds and really think about it. I literally could not think of a single one. I asked a few friends with long histories of playing games. While everyone can name a bunch of games that occasionally required moving left, almost no one could think of one that had you moving left as a standard. One person pointed out Mushroom 11, a quirky platformer where you guided a slimy blob through levels, traveling mostly to the left. So they do exist, but they're rare. Now, I should have remembered 1982's Jungle King. I briefly mentioned it in my very first video, but it completely slipped my mind. In this game, you swing, swim, run, and jump, always to the left. I wasn't familiar with the rest of these games until making this video, but the next on our list is Walker by Psygnosis in 1993, where you pilot a walking mech to the left. I love this quote from an article in Eurogamer, which declares, "This shouldn't have any tangible impact at all, but it goes against so many deeply embedded gaming instincts that at first it seems genuinely alien and unsettling, like watching the hands on a clock move backwards. It makes Walker memorable in eccentric southpaw."
This new magic game is mine now. Mine! And that goody-goody prince who created it will never get it back. I'll name it Dragonfire.
Dragonfire was released on the Atari 2600 in 1982 and then ported to a few other systems. It features a knight who must dodge past a fire-breathing dragon to collect treasure. Once again, he must move left to progress. Panic Express on the Atari and Commodore 64 had players trying to stop a runaway train. Both the train and the player moved to the left. Sky Kid was a horizontal scrolling shooter, the only one I could find that went exclusively left. And finally, I have this 1985 Roadrunner arcade game. You play as a Roadrunner eating birdseed and trying to stay ahead of the coyote, once again running to the left. I'm sure these aren't the only games like this, but these are the ones I could easily find. I didn't expect to find very many, but I was still a little surprised at how few of them I actually turned up. Given how widely games vary, it's pretty interesting that left-moving games seem to be so incredibly rare. Somehow, the entire game industry just decided that games go to the right. But why? Looking into this, whenever someone asks, why do games always go right? The most common answer is some variation of, because Mario did it. Fair enough, Super Mario Bros. In 1985 was an extremely influential game, and there's no doubt that a ton of other games took it as an inspiration. It was also extremely focused on going to the right, so much so that you couldn't even scroll the screen back to the left. But looking at those examples I showed you, only 2 of them came out before 1985, and it's not like Mario was the first scrolling game to go right. Pitfall and Moon Patrol both came out before that and had similar rightward movement. I tried going through some old interviews of Mario's creators to see if they ever commented on why the game scrolled left versus right, but no luck. The closest I got was a comment that Mario was deliberately drawn with a big nose to make it easier to see what direction he was facing. Was Mario always set up to go right? Let's take a look at Mario's earlier appearances.
Something's coming up the plumbing, poor Luigi's in a bind. Giant turtles out to get him, creepy crabs are right behind. Fighter flies, jeepers, yikes, they're all coming out the pipes.
Mario, where are you?
It's Atari Mario Brothers.
Mario Bros., with no super, takes place on a symmetrical screen with looping edges. It doesn't seem like there'd be any obvious right or left movement, but Mario's starting position is on the left side of the screen, still preparing the player to move right. Donkey Kong had 4 screens, where the real goal was usually to move up, but let's look at them more closely. The classic zigzag initially required Mario to move right before doubling back. This one with the bouncing springs again positions Mario on the left side so he can begin moving right. I always called this one the Pie Factory when I was a kid, but I'm learning now that these were apparently supposed to be trays of cement. Either way, Mario starts in the bottom left, probably begins by moving right. Even the rivets level does this. There's no location you're trying to get to, the goal is to remove all the rivets and drop Donkey Kong. They could start the player anywhere, but still he starts in the bottom left. Now I know this is probably a programming quirk where it's easier just to keep the player's starting position constant, but it's still interesting to me that even in 1980, they were preparing Mario to run to the right. So why to the right? Claire Obscura thought this might be related to reading direction. When I see people discuss this, both online and in person, the direction of written text is usually a pretty common guess. Something like 80% of people in the world primarily use a language that goes left to right when written, so it makes sense most of our games might go in the same way. But Claire wondered why Japanese developers would make a game character go right when their text reads the opposite way. First, I do want to clear up a possible misconception. Japanese text is written in 2 ways, vertical and horizontal. When written vertically, the text is read right to left, so if you're a manga fan you've probably seen this. But when written in a horizontal row, the characters are read left to right, the same as in English. I've seen some discussions where people wondered if there was maybe a mechanical or a technological explanation, like maybe there was something about old hardware that made it easier to scroll graphics in one direction, or the setup of joysticks and buttons in old arcade cabinets made it more natural to move to the right than to the left. But I really haven't come across anything to back that up. What I did find was actually pretty surprising. This preference for rightward movement is actually a situation that has existed for quite a while, and not just in games. When researching this trend, I came across a number of scientific papers that were researching a similar trend, except in movies. I'm going to pause here and remind you that I'm just a guy who makes YouTube videos about video game minutiae. Reading and analyzing scientific studies is a little bit outside my field, but I'm going to do my best. This is oversimplifying, but there's a noticeable bias in film of lateral movement being toward the right side of the screen. Of course, this isn't universal, but scenes where the camera pans to the side are more likely to go to the right, especially if it's not following a character's motion. When we do see characters running or driving, it's also more common to be toward the right. This is especially true when trying to show characters making some sort of progress or making forward movement of some sort. When characters face off in some sort of contest, fight, or giant battle, it's much more common for the protagonist to be on the left side facing to the right. It's almost a little game you can play. It's present in war movies, sports movies, action films, even animated movies. It just seems like most of humanity has decided that things look more natural when they're moving from left to right. Again, I want to remind you that this obviously is not a universal rule, and it is not that hard to find scenes going the other way. But all things being equal, you would expect it to be a 50-50 split, equally likely to have the hero moving left or right, and that's just not the case. The tendency to go to the right is somewhere in like the 2/3 of the time range. But that still doesn't answer the why. Now it gets a little wishy-washy here, and there's a few theories, and it's not always clear where the line between nature and nurture is. So to start, a lot of this is cultural. In cultures all over the world, there's a long tradition of the right side being good and the left side being bad. In English, if something is right, it is also correct, as in the right thing to do is morally upstanding. The word sinister comes from the Latin word for left, and there's a lot of negatives associated with the left side. There's a superstition that throwing spilled salt over your left shoulder will ward off the evil spirits that lurk there.
Uh-oh.
Alright, who's the dead man that hit me with the salt shaker?
You've probably seen that thing in cartoons where someone's getting advice from a little angel and devil. Did you ever notice that the devil is always on the left shoulder and the angel is usually on the right? It's not even that long ago that children were discouraged from using their left hand when writing or eating. I know someone's going to ask, so I should probably mention that our modern usage of left and right to refer to political parties and policies isn't really related. It just came from seating arrangements in the French National Assembly after the French Revolution. The idea of right being right and left being wrong likely comes from the prevalence of right-handed people. 85 to 90% of people are right-handed. The right hand was what almost everyone used, and thus the right hand became the right hand. So why are so many people right-handed? Again, this is something that's still debated, but it looks like it has something to do with brain structure. Our brains have two halves, with each side focusing on different things. Now, this also gets exaggerated and oversimplified a lot, but the basic idea is true. The left side is used more for things like math, logic, pattern recognition, and language processing, while the right side is better at more creative, symbolic, and abstract thinking. Each half of the brain controls the muscles on the other side of the body, so your right hand is controlled by the left half of your brain. It's believed that since we use the left side of our brain for logical, sequential, concrete thinking and spatial awareness, it feels more natural to use the right hand for those sorts of movements and actions. In studies where they scanned the brains of left-handed people, they were often using their brains differently than right-handed people. Again, I should note that there's a lot of pseudoscience around this topic. If you see someone claim that some people use one half of their brain more than other people or something, that's not really how it works. So to get back to the original question, the structure of the human brain means that a large majority of people use their right hand as the dominant hand. Over time, this helped form a cultural idea of the right side being good and the left side being bad. This has spread through culture in many different ways. Some combination of brain structure and cultural tradition has now given us the general sense that lateral movement to the right seems more positive or natural than movement to the left. This bias is subtle but present in films which show a preference to portraying the hero moving towards the right. This continued over into the world of video games, which overwhelmingly had their heroes moving toward the right, but it's difficult to say how much of this is because it feels more natural, and how much is because they're copying similar games that came before. But what do you think? Do you have any other examples of primarily left-moving games? Do you have your own theory about what's going on? Or do you have your own question or mystery that you want me to look into? Let me know in the comments. Thank you again to Claire Obscure for today's question, and thanks to all of you for watching. See you next time.